You know that Morrowind has more NPCs than Oblivion and Skyrim combined? Another interesting fact, there are more Imperials in Morrowind than in Oblivion, which is set in their own homeland of Cyrodiil. NPCs or non-playable characters are soul of every role-playing game, and Morrowind has literal thousands of characters placed in all corners of its hostile and unique world, making it feel, for a game that old, surprisingly alive and vibrant. Now, in all fairness, Morrowind's characters lack some of the more modern features found in later games, such as radiant AI or fully voiced dialogues, but still they are far from being boring and generic. On the contrary, through exceptionally well-written dialogues and masterful display of ambient storytelling, almost every single NPC in this 20-plus-year-old game has a story to tell, no matter how small and insignificant, and a unique, recognizable personality.
Yes, confused? We're all waiting.
Be careful out here in the wild, friend. There's more roaming about than just wolves and bears.
I always loved the fact that I could learn a lot about random characters just by seeing what type of books they read, or is there a secret item hidden under their bed? What kind of food do they eat? Clothes they wear? Is there a soul gem hidden under the pillow? Possibilities to analyze their lifestyles and personalities based on lines of dialogue and ambient storytelling are truly endless and very fun. So over the years, more like 2 decades, and thousands of hours spent in the world of Morrowind, I came to know some of its inhabitants quite well. They became more than just mere pieces of data. They became characters, just like ones from real-life literature that we analyze and talk about. Some of them grew on me and entertained my imagination. So today's video is a small tribute to some of my favorite NPCs in Morrowind. I'm sure that some of the entries on this list will surprise most of you. I could easily just list 10 most popular NPCs and be done with it, but instead I wanted to dig a little bit deeper and find the ones that have something a little bit special about them. Not all heroes in this book are famous, renowned individuals, shiny knights and noble kings. As I was compiling the list, I soon discovered just how difficult it was to choose only 10 characters. I also realized that some of my favorite NPCs are really insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but it's always some aspect of their life story or personality that makes them so memorable to me. Some of the selected NPCs barely show up in the game or have a very few lines of dialogue, yet they still manage to stir up my imagination. Some of them also lead a very common day-to-day lifestyle. So thank you again for joining me. My name is Alec, and these are top 10 of my favorite NPCs in Morrowind. Starting at number 10, Baladas Demnevanni, aka Renegade Telvanni Wizard. Great House Telvanni comes with an entire constellation of interesting and memorable characters. I mean, it's a house ran by egocentric, extremely powerful and, in many cases, insane wizards. Easily one of the most famous NPCs in perhaps entire Elder Scrolls series is the legendary 4,000-year-old wizard Divide Fear. And I could easily put him anywhere on this list, but I decided to choose another, perhaps lesser known favorite among the Telvanni ranks who is, in my opinion, often overlooked. There is a reason why Baladas Demnevanni is known as a renegade Telvanni wizard. He isn't interested in the usual affairs of Telvanni leaders. In fact, he seems totally uninterested in daily politics of Morrowind in general. Instead, he chooses a solitary life, operating pretty much outside the system, whether it's the native Dunmer or Western colonial. He simply doesn't care about any of that. And what's best, he has just enough power and authority to support his reclusive and independent lifestyle. Baladas lives in a tower in the village of Granius, where he has all the supplies delivered to him. Imagine being that feared or respected, or probably a bit of both, that locals literally deliver everything you need at your door. General Darius, also stationed in Granius, has this to say about him. He keeps to himself, has his food and supplies delivered to his door. He's been a good neighbor, quiet, no trouble. But then we soon find out that Baladas imprisoned an imperial tax collector, an orc named Ragash, right in front of the Imperial Legion's nose, refusing to pay any taxes. Upon trying to rescue her, this is what Baladas has to say. She came demanding tribute for the Empire of Man. I was here before Gnisis, before the Empire of Man. I will be here after Gnisis is gone and after this short-lived empire has crumbled. The people of Gnisis live only because I tolerate them. Why should I pay tribute? This has to be one of my single favorite quotes in-game. It perfectly encapsulates the defiant attitude and character of Baladas Demnevanni and his complete disregard for any outside authority. General Darius and Legion troops are stationed literally across the road and none even dares to arrest him for committing an obvious crime. This could be out of fear, as Baladas is by all means a quite dangerous sorcerer. But I believe it's also out of, well, let's say respect for someone so old. He has, after all, accumulated around 2000 years and is deeply enshrouded in mystery. Where Baladas really shines is, however, his expertise on all things Dwemer. He is quite right obsessed by this lost civilization and provides some of the most potent bits of esoteric lore through dialogue. He is actually involved in several quests, but my favorite has to be Mystery of the Dwarves, issued by Archmage Trebonius. Without going too deep into it right now, this whole questline is very fun because it requires a real detective work and, spoilers alert, Baladas is one of the leading experts on Dwemer who can and will provide the player with a lot of new interesting information. In short, if you are interested in obscure Elder Scrolls lore, Baladas is your man. Or mare. And this is also where we begin to see the other, hidden side of Baladas. You see, beneath that reclusive, grumpy surface, Baladas can be quite respectful and is in reality much less arrogant and self-absorbed than other Telvanni leaders. Let's take for example another, more well-known Telvanni member, Master Nalot. He is, of course, reused by Bethesda in Skyrim's DLC Dragonborn, thus making him pretty famous among the general Elder Scrolls fandom. In Morrowind, however, I never really found him interesting or special. As a matter of fact, Nalot is pretty much constantly arrogant towards the player, which is, I know, a Telvanni trademark and why so many players out there love this great house, but I appreciate a more complex or layered character portrayed by Baladas. Let's see for example what Master Nalot has to say when player becomes a Hortator towards the end of the main questline. Hortator, war leader of the House Telvanni. Is that necessary? Why doesn't anyone tell me about these things? So, do you want a job? Are you qualified? Good. Then go ahead, I don't care. Be the Hortator. Now go away. And mind you, this is after we raised his disposition towards us by a lot. This is Nalot at his most respectful. And now let's see Baladas' comment on the same topic, with nothing but average disposition. Yes, of course, your story is quite compelling. And there is no question about the proof you offer. I have found you, on the whole, an agreeable colleague, and I think you are the most suitable candidate for Hortator of House Telvanni. And even with a significantly low disposition, this is how he declines to help. I'm afraid I'll have to decline. No, I believe your story, and there's no question about the proof you offer, but I feel that lately you have treated me disrespectfully, and I find it offensive. Perhaps we do need a Hortator. But perhaps we do not need someone like you to be that Hortator. So to conclude, when I mention that Baladas is severely underappreciated, it's because I'd really love to know what happened to him after the Red Year. Bethesda chose Nalot as a go-to Telvanni guy for Skyrim's DLC content, and in a way I can understand why, as he has this edgy, arrogant character. But in my opinion, seeing Baladas 200 years after Morrowind will be equally as interesting, especially because of his extensive research on the Dwemer mysteries. I feel like there will be so many fun ways to reintroduce this complex, noble and highly knowledgeable character. At number 9 stands the unlucky Imperial Commoner, Vodunius Nuccius. Now, some may think this is a joke, but I assure you that it's not, because I'd feel really bad if I didn't put poor Vodunius on this list. In many ways, to me, he represents the other side of Morrowind. A side filled with commoners living their simple yet not so easy lives, struggling to survive each day. A side of Morrowind that is often overlooked, but without it, the game would never feel so rich and immersive. without all the small, insignificant villages, poor merchants, and commoners just minding their own business. I still remember my first Morrowind playthrough, and upon leaving the census office, seeing this long-haired Imperial proudly standing in the middle of Seyda-Nin, as if he was waiting to talk to me. I thought that he's a local governor, someone of importance, so he was the first NPC I talked to. To my surprise, soon after I found that he's a simple commoner. There are stereotypes attached to each race in Elder Scrolls universe, and it is widely believed that well-educated and well-spoken Imperials were born to be successful. They are the privileged ones. In Skyrim, Imperials even have an ability called Imperial Luck, allowing them to simply always find a few gold coins more. Well, Vodunius Nuccius must be an exception from this rule because, you see, with a little investigation around the village, we will soon find out that he is down on his luck. Simply asking for a little advice from Vodunius will lead us to Darvam Hlaren, Seyda-Nin's caravaner, and asking Darvam about Vodunius will, in return, let us know that Vodunius seems to be unhappy in Seyda-Nin. At no point will game force us to get directly involved in what seems to be nothing but a small town talk. We can simply ignore all of it and leave Seyda-Nin and its inhabitants for good. But there is a choice, and player can return to Vodunius and ask him directly about his unhappiness. It turns out that Vodunius truly struggles and wishes nothing else but to leave Seyda-Nin for good. But he doesn't even have enough money to fund his trip. We are then placed in front of another final choice. Vodunius will ask if we would like to buy a cursed ring for 100 septims, thus giving him enough money for a next boat to Narcissus. 100 septims isn't a large sum, however, this minor quest is set right at the beginning of the game, when most players, especially inexperienced ones, still struggle to earn enough coin. Which makes the choice even harder. Will you give Vodunius hard-earned 100 septims and a chance for a better life in Narcissus, or not? As for me, I always buy his cursed ring. It's pretty useless in terms of enchantments, but it's a unique piece of jewelry that I like to keep throughout the game as a reminder of humble beginnings. And even though I often miss NPCs that disappear from the game, it's a really nice piece of slice of life that enriches Morrowind experience. And I wonder, will Vodunius find his luck on his way to Narcissus? By the way, it's also interesting that he mentions Narcissus specifically, which is located in the south of Morrowind's mainland, instead of a more generic going back home to Cyrodiil answer. So we're left with more questions. Is his original home in Narcissus? Is he trying to start a new business in the big city? I'm happy to say that Tamriel Rebuilt, my absolutely favorite mod, will add Vodunius somewhere along the road to Narcissus in a future release, so we will meet him again and perhaps have a chance to aid him further towards a happier life. At number 8, Hlormar Wine-Sot. Naked Nord barbarian standing in the middle of nowhere is one of the most iconic and recognizable Morrowind moments. There are in total 3 of them on Vardenfell and 1 in Mournhold, which is more of a reference. Now, out of those 3, Hlormar Wine-Sot, Hiszen Deep Raid and Borthrir, 2 of them are found relatively near each other, between Caldera and Aldrun. The running joke, if you want to call it as such, is that they are tricked by a witch, put to sleep or paralyzed, and then left naked alone in the wilderness. Players are most likely to first meet Hlormar, and out of all 3, he is, in my opinion, most memorable and fleshed out. There are those little moments in game that are nostalgia-filled, simply because they left such a huge impression on me when I played for the first time. And this is one of them. Every single time I see Hlormar standing there all helpless and without a single item, it feels like watching a favorite funny scene from a movie you watched a long time ago. It's a silly moment, well cherished in a predominantly serious game. Well, at least till you actually encounter a supposed witch. I gotta admit, Bethesda has a thing for throwing in these really ambiguous storylines, leaving on to us to decide whom to trust. Now, I'm not going to analyze the quest itself as it's unimportant for today's topic. Whether you choose to side with Hlormar or Socia, that's totally on you. I believe that the story is purposely left open for interpretation, and whichever option we choose, it's the right one. Reason I chose Hlormar as one of my favorite NPCs though is because of the silliness, nostalgia and iconic imagery he brings to Morrowind, and only then comes the actual entertaining value of his quest. But since we are already here, let me mention that Hisin Deepred, who was left naked not far from Hlormar, also blamed a witch, and since in his case we never found who that witch is, there are theories that it's actually Socia herself.
What makes you think she's a witch? Well, she turned me into a newt!
Running around and stealing man's clothes and weapons, preferring big dumb barbarians as perfect victims. In any case, Hlormar fits this image of a not-so-bright, bulky, brute Nord barbarian running around in fur and swinging me axe at anything that moves. In those days of early 2000s, I was coming from Conan the Barbarian comics, which were my favorite, so I guess I had a soft spot for barbarians in general. And Morrowind really created this fantastic larger-than-life image of a pure icy primal wilderness that is Skyrim. Long time before Skyrim came out in 2011. I also think that Hlormar's naive side and intellectual simplicity kinda made me side with him on the first playthrough, since he was obviously made as a caricature on purpose. So with that said, speaking to Hlormar can actually reveal some details from his life that I always liked. I particularly love when NPCs in Morrowind talk about other provinces, even if it's a simple comment with a very few words. And Hlormar, of course, mentions Skyrim when asked about his trade. Makes me living as a fighter for hire I do. Learned the way as a lad in the basements of every city bar in Windhelm. After my father's life was claimed by the Snow Elves, I had to provide for myself with all the mercenary jobs. I'm good with me fists and better with me axe. I came to Wardenfell once it was open to search out some new fortune among these damn dark elves. Now look what's happened to me. It's such a sweet little descriptive piece, a life story compressed into a few lines of dialogue. I mean, learning to fight in the basements of every city bar in Windhelm as a young boy? Try to imagine that, since we all know just how cold and rough Windhelm can be. And how about that line about his father being claimed by snow elves? It's really fun. At number 7 stands Percius Mercius. Remember when I said that not all heroes are shiny knights, brave warriors and that sort of things? Well, sometimes they still are, and in this case we have someone who is perhaps the finest example of an all-around good guy, a champion of justice, someone who may as well be a local legend, a veteran hero. Percius is a former Fighters Guild master, now semi-retired in the city of Aldrune, living among his veteran friends. In a land populated by, at best, morally grey characters, a truly lawful good ones stand tall and mighty, and in my case it will be quite strange to not mention Percius. Fighters Guild is probably my default go-to guild in every playthrough and always felt as a second home to my character. So no wonder that some of its members found their place on this top list. The thing is that throughout the years I made a sort of a list of players' allies in Morrowind, which I named the Circle of Friends. Of course, this list greatly reflects my general playstyle of a law-abiding pro-Empire knight. So it's comprised of people like Caius Cosades, Larius Varo, and among them, Percius Mercius. Percius supports the player and guides him towards the guild's leadership position, at the same time providing comments on various tasks issued to us by other guild members. He serves as a moral compass, and if certain job doesn't fit the guild's rule, he will provide a comment on it. As it's known, there is a corrupted party within the leadership of Fighters Guild, ran by Sioring Hardheart and Eydis Fire-Eye. Towards the end of the questline, player will have to deal with them in one way or another, and Percius will aid the player towards the good ending. Since Percius provides a lot of lines of dialogue, we occasionally get a short sneak peek into his background. This one gives us more insight into his character history and is provided at the very end of the questline. The orcish armor was a gift from an Imperial Legionnaire stationed here several years ago. He was unjustly accused of murder, and I was able to find out the truth and free him. The glass armor was another gift from Atin Sareti of House Radoran. He had the armor made for me after I enlisted the Fighters Guild to help clean up the last outbreak of blighted creatures back in 24 that nearly destroyed Mar Gan. 24 being of course year 424, only 3 years prior to the events of Morrowind. But it's honestly impressive that he received such a valuable gift, a complete glass armor set from the Radoran, who aren't very favorable towards the Western colonists. However, Percius enlisting Fighters Guild members for such an honorable cause definitely speaks volumes to his character and respect he has towards the natives, which only earned him respect from the Redoran, a traditional great house that values honor and the way of the warrior. It's honestly surprising that Percius isn't generally more popular and talked about, but perhaps him staying low-key and playing a role of a supporting character as well as being a boring all-around good guy doesn't make him a very interesting topic among the fans. At number 6 we have a living legend, Snowy Granius. There are many different ways I could approach the story of Snowy Granius, especially because there is no story of Snowy Granius. Instead, he is an experience, a sort of a meme character within the Morrowind community, but this honorable status of a meme legend is earned and not given lightly. Some time ago, I made a video overanalyzing the Dwemer ruin of Arkenhand, which is populated by an iconic low-level gang of smugglers. Snowy Granius is a member of this gang, and I believe carefully placed right at the end of the long, massive Dwemer bridge, northeast of Moonmount Legion Fort, waiting for an unsuspecting player. We are meant to meet him at the early stages of the game, since our first main quest mission is to obtain a Dwemer puzzle box hidden in a Dwemer ruin just behind him across the bridge that he guards so carefully. And I always saw him as a first mini boss fight. I mean, he is a level 3 battle mage, capable of summoning the undead, shooting destruction spells, and even conjuring Daedric spears. That's a heavy weight class. All jokes aside, what I especially like about this encounter is that it can provide a very entertaining duel due to its location. It's amusing seeing old Snowy running towards you across the long bridge, losing all the stamina in the process, summoning a skeleton right in front of his nose only to be expired before even reaching you, or casting a shock projectile and hitting his own minion, or even having an unplanned ally in the form of a nearby cliff racer. And sometimes I let him chase me all the way to Balmora, just for fun. Snowy's encounter is definitely an initiation process, a first true test. And so it happens that a completely random NPC without a single line of dialogue or background story is on my list of top 10 favorite characters. Like I said, Snowy is an experience, and there can be no Morrowind experience without a fine duel with good old Snowy. Sometimes a simple bandit can have a strong, charismatic presence, and Snowy Granius is definitely one of them. And I would add more on that. Something I truly miss in Skyrim are the unique named bandits. I don't know, it kinda gave them a character, just by having a real name instead of a generic title, bandit, outlaw, and so on, made me look at them as real persons with flesh and blood who just happened to fall from grace and became criminals, perhaps forced by the hardships of their lives, being in a wrong place at the wrong time, sort of a destiny thing. Destiny, after all, plays an important role in the Elder Scrolls universe. In other words, naming humanizes them. So I like to think of Snowy Granius as a veteran battle mage who went through many hardships in life. It's a simple, straightforward story and makes our encounter in-game that more worthy. Perhaps as he charges across the road towards us, he secretly wishes for an honorable end, worthy of an old, sickly warrior. At number 5 stands Ulyne Henim. Ulyne Henim is probably the least known character on this list, and in order to explain why is she here, I will have to take a few steps back. Ulyne is a part of the Fighters Guild quest, the Necromancer of Vas, given to us by previously mentioned Percius. This simple quest to kill a renegade necromancer living in a remote Velotti tower was and still is one of my favorites. It may sound cheesy, but it's the journey to the very tower, located to the far north on an island in the Sheogorath region, that always felt like a nice, adventurous build-up to the encounter with a dangerous necromancer. It's at this point, due to the quest's slightly higher difficulty from the previous guild missions, that my character usually transforms from a journeyman into a capable warrior. At least, that's how I always understood and felt this moment. And this quest will be pretty fun on its own, however there is a twist to it. We are also tasked to meet a young witch hunter, Ulyne Henim, who is already waiting for us on the island. She is a member of Buoyant Armigers, however, due to her inexperience, she requires our aid in clearing out the tower. So at this point, we have one of the truly rare moments in Morrowind to actually raid a dungeon alongside another NPC. We can choose to enter the tower together and fight our way through, thus risking her dying, or clearing it out on our own and letting Ulyne stay just outside the tower, thus ensuring her survival. This is of course the good way to complete the task, since if she remains alive and unharmed, she will give best recommendations and we will earn more gold. So that's a little bit of the background for this character who shows up very briefly during this quest and then disappears from the game forever. And you might ask then, why is she on this list? Well, here's the thing. If we complete this mission successfully back in Aldrune, Percius will comment that Ulyne was so impressed by our skills that she will personally request our aid in future contracts. So after playing for the first time, I expected to see Ulyne back as my companion in another mission. But that, of course, never happened. And that made me realize how badly I miss a true fun companion in Morrowind to quest and adventure with. And Ulyne seemed so perfect for that. She wasn't some mighty mercenary, but an inexperienced witch hunter who only wanted to cleanse the world of evil, foul necromancers and Daedra worshippers. I honestly looked forward to being her companion, making sure she stays unharmed and survives each task. It was something I looked forward to. I also expected to see her again waiting for me, maybe back in Aldrune or Vivec, anywhere, but then I realized that she literally shows up for that one single task and then completely vanishes, all on that small remote island to the far north. So perhaps this entry is at the same time a comment on one Morrowind mechanic that I really miss. Perhaps it's the old engine limiting games' true companion potential. Sure, there are companion mods now, but I always wanted Ulyne Henim beside myself, a mysterious, inexperienced witch hunter that I knew nothing about and met on that small rocky island for a brief time. At number 4, Ygfa. Ygfa is a Nord healer serving the Imperial cult at Fort Pelagiad. Again, at first sight, there is really nothing spectacular about her. She is a potential part of a single small random quest that makes you carry a stolen silver bowl across the Ascadian Isles back to its owner. And that's kinda it. However, on pretty much every single playthrough, I make sure to visit her as soon as possible. Firstly, she is a member of the Imperial cult, one of my favorite factions. And truth is, even though I am all for them, Imperial cult isn't really known for having that many interesting characters. On the contrary, most of the higher ranking people within the cult are very pushy and stuck up, and overall not that fun to talk to. Except for Ygfa. She has plenty of dialogue, offering a true wealth of knowledge on all diseases found in Morrowind, as well as on magic, cures, vampires, potions, and even attributes. And for someone who is a big fan of the School of Restoration, she is something of a real in-game teacher. For example, I love the way she describes in-game attributes. Here's her take on willpower. A creature's willpower is its property of maintaining its purpose and identity in the face of hardship and malign natural and supernatural forces. A creature with strong willpower is better able to resist the effects of hostile spells cast upon it. Or a take on personality. A creature's personality is its property of exciting the emotions of interest, trust, and loyalty in other creatures. For example, a creature with a powerful personality is more able to persuade and influence other creatures through speech, gesture, and demeanor. It's such a simple yet effective way to describe game mechanics in organic, realistic way as to how they will actually work in real life. Ygfa will also comment on the town of Pelagiad, which is next to Caldera, one of my favorite little towns to just chill and walk around. Pelagiad is a small place. Just a halfway trade house, a couple of merchants, a few colonists, and Fort Pelagiad. Most of us are outlanders, colonists from the Empire, adventurers looking for our fortunes. And here is a little bit of info about her own background. You want my advice, rookie? I've been around. I've risen to adept rank in the cult by being smart and careful. And if I were you, I'd stay away from Daedric ruins until you have a little bit more experience. and a heftier kit bag. So we get a sense of Ygfa as an experienced adventurer and healer, a patient and overly cautious Nord woman who will gladly advise the player to take his or her time and gather some experience before rushing into some dangerous Daedric ruin. She also sells a whole variety of very useful restoration spells, and even a unique turn undead spell called Blessed Touch, with 100 points turn undead effect for a whole 30 seconds, costing only 5 septims. Again, for someone who usually plays as a pro-Empire Knight Paladin focused on mastering restoration, Ygfa is literally one of the best allies and teachers in-game, and has a somewhat unique, cheerful, and even comedic personality.
Seen any elves?
Yeah, Ygfa, you crack me every time. Alright, at number 3 we have none other than Eydis Fire-Eye. Okay, another Nord woman. I already mentioned Eydis previously, and in a pretty much negative context, in a sense that she is a highly corrupt Fighters Guild steward, and this could be one of the reasons for being on this list. Okay, let me try to explain. I also already mentioned Fighters Guild being my go-to faction, providing me with a sense of job security. It's basically a second home to my character, one of the very few routes connecting me with the hostile and exotic world of Wardenfell. And then we have Balmora, it's the city, place that feels like home, a sort of a safe zone. And then we have Eydis, who is Fighters Guild quest giver in Balmora and someone I probably spend most time with next to Caius Cosades. I always go back to the early days of playing Morrowind. Eydis was one of the NPCs I always loved talking to, even when she made those little smirky remarks like, "Oh, so you killed the rats? Great job." At times she will feel all smug and blunt, and sometimes she will seem to genuinely praise me. What I want to say is, there are layers to her personality. I wouldn't call her a complex character, but for Morrowind standards, she is multi-layered and honestly quite interesting. I'd even say that she is one of the icons of Morrowind, a flaming red-headed Nord woman, adorned in native bone mold armor and wielding a Dwemer mace. Speaking of female characters in video games in general, I always thought that Elder Scrolls series did a phenomenal job of portraying various types of female fantasy characters. In Elder Scrolls, we have a fair share of typical vulnerable maidens in despair requiring our help, tricksters using charm and intelligence in order to subdue physically stronger opponents, mystic witches, and then plain, strong, independent, tough warrior types equal by all means to any other male counterpart. These characters never felt forced or placed in as tokens, but as genuine in-game characters that earn their place under the sun. Eydis is a fighter, an opportunist, a survivor in a world filled with all kinds of dangers, both natural and supernatural. So in the end, she comes in with traits that should follow a character of that type. Remember Percius? A guy who by all means stands as an ideal all-around good guy? He actually has a very interesting comment on Eydis, a fellow member of the Fighters Guild. Eydis Fire-Eye is a good fighter, but there's always been something dark about her. I found out just recently what that was. She's a worshipper of Clavicus Vile. I don't know how you can use this information, I'm sure she can't be blackmailed. There are several characters throughout the game that do have a genuine secret dark side. They would appear as normal everyday neighbors and good citizens, but are indeed secret Daedra worshippers, or worse. And Percius is right, Eydis does indeed worships Clavicus Vile. Now, I have mentioned that conclusion of the Fighters Guild questline involves a dramatic turn of events. Player is tasked with siding with Percius and removing the corrupted leadership comprised of Sioring, Eydis, and Hlormar, at least if player wants to assume the position of the guild's new leader. However, interestingly, there is a way to bribe Eydis out of Sioring's pocket and back to our side by giving her one of the Daedric artifacts, specifically one that belongs to Clavicus Vile. This is of course left on player to decide, but I find amusing that Eydis is so corrupt that we can sort of a double bribe her back to our side. Or perhaps she's such a devout worshipper of Clavicus Vile that she's truly ready to side with us. Again, it's left open, but it adds complexity to her character. And also, I wish I knew this secret option back in the early days when I felt really bad for having to kill her in order to become a new guild master. It was one of the genuinely sad and shocking moments for me. So with everything said, in my opinion, Eydis deserves a high spot on this top list as one of the iconic faces of Morrowind. Number 2 belongs to everyone's favorite bookseller, Jobasha. Jobasha is probably one of the most beloved characters in-game. First of all, he is a Khajiit, and fan community certainly has a special love for the cat-like people of Elsewhere. He is also the proprietor of Jobasha's rare books, definitely one of the most visited shops in-game. Jobasha is actually involved in a large number of quests. He sells a book called Progress of Truth for the main quest, Chronicles of Ancient for the Mages Guild, Antecedents of Dwemer Law and Chronicles of Ancient for Baladas. Remember him? He also helps us finding Boetia's glory to rebuild the sunken shrine and gives us advice on dealing with Jadanar as a part of Achnasi, a special friend questline. And last but not least, he rewards us for freeing slaves. In short, he's pretty involved in our affairs as well as in the daily politics, and doesn't shy away from sharing an opinion on various topics. There is one of the popular topics on which he has a unique take. If asked about unrest in Cyrodiil, he says the following: "Things are bad for man and Khajiit. The provinces war with one another, never smelling the common enemy in their midst. The Empire spreads its troops far and wide with strict orders to do nothing. Children no longer respect their elders. People no longer respect the law. Corruption is everywhere. There are no heroes like there were in Jobasha's grandmother's day. All this fuss over the Emperor's illness is just a symptom." And to be straightforward, it's fun to see a successful Khajiit having such a special place in the game's world. It's always good to see a broken stereotype, in this case Khajiits being mostly thieves, slaves, or outcasts in general. Another quote which I like is about his homeland: "We are from the deserts and forests of Elsewhere. There are many Khajiit, but only the small, agile Satay Racht are common here in Wardenfell. When people think of Khajiit, they think of thieves, perhaps because it is hard for us to understand property." This gives us an interesting insight into Khajiit mentality, suggesting that their supposed inherited affinity towards thievery is based on a cultural difference. So in a land dominated by harsh stoic Dunmer, loud Nords and opportunistic Imperials, it's refreshing to see a knowledgeable and pretty chill Khajiit surrounded by countless volumes of books. Bookstores truly have a certain charm, and I miss them greatly in Skyrim. And at number 1, we have Caius Cosades. There is a certain image or a scene that plays at the very end of my imaginary Elder Scrolls book, or a movie. It's a silent scene, played out without words. An old imperial man sits by the river, gazing wistfully into the water. Besides him is a mysterious Dunmer figure, attempting carefully to console the old man. They seem to be old friends, reminiscing the old times. They are, of course, Nervarine and Caius Cosades. Caius is of course number 1 on my list of favorite NPCs, and I could talk about him for a very long time. I even plan on making a special episode dedicated just to his character, perhaps in future. But let's just say for now that he may be the best written NPC in Morrowind. When Oblivion came out, and knowing that it's set in Cyrodiil, first thing that I want to know was, can we find Caius? Can we discover what happened to the old man? I think this speaks a lot about the impact Caius left on me, especially during the first playthrough where everything seems so dangerous, so unknown and so remote, and when it felt that we have truly one and only friend, embodied in a shirtless, mature imperial male addicted to moon sugar, living undercover in a humble bed and basket house in Balmora. I think that characters with a touch of melancholy always had a special impact on me, and Caius has it all. There is a presence of melancholy, of course, to his character, as he comments on current major events with a strikingly accurate prediction. The days of the Empire are almost over. When the Emperor dies, 9 hells are going to break loose. Forget about the Imperial City, think locally. Worry about the 6th house and Dagon and squabbles between the great houses and the colonists. The rest of the political nonsense doesn't amount to a plate of scuttle. And adding on top of that, other Blades agents will comment on his personality. He is okay, sour, a warrior, but he knows his job and leaves us alone to do ours. One of the breaking points in game is the moment Caius gets recalled. Needless to say, it was a huge shock to me. These last words have a very serious, menacing undertone. Internal politics, some concern about my sugar. I thought about refusing their recall, but they have members of my family back in the capital. I'm afraid it may have something to do with problems with the succession. As the Emperor's health declines, factions are maneuvering for advantage. I may be gone for a while. That's why you are promoted to operative. Sense of danger is then even reaffirmed by Mera Milo, who will react to Caius' disappearance with these words. Caius has gone back to the Imperial City. He says he's been recalled. I wonder. I never know what he's thinking. I think he's involved in something secret, something dangerous. I was hoping he might help us, and now he's gone. I don't know what to think. It's at this point, in the middle of the main quest, that Caius disappears from game, only to be never seen again. I spoke earlier about characters that at some point disappear from game, having something special about them, since you kinda cherish their presence and time spent together. And in Caius' case, it's even more impactful. He's the main ally, a teacher, a guide, mentor, protector, call it however you want, and only to be simply removed from game at the moment when things seem to be heating up. It's really cruel, but at the same time masterfully dramatic stroke by developers. And being a well-designed character, there is a theory attached to Caius regarding his apparent addiction to moon sugar. You see, at first it does seem like it's a good cover-up story for a spy, until it's mentioned at the very end that his higher-ups are concerned about his sugar, i.e. moon sugar addiction, at which point it becomes more ambiguous since it suggests that he really does have a problem. My overall take is that he actually does have an addiction, which would make his character more vulnerable, real, and thus more effective. After all, a local Khajiit thief, Kiranir, has this to say: "The old grey hair gobbles sugar like scuttle." Kiranir is surprised he still walks, but it doesn't affect him. That is the mark of a long-time user. As for Caius' post-game journey, there are some hints added by Ken Ralston, one of the lead designers of Morrowind, so they are kinda seen as unofficial lore. In any case, it appears that Caius was stationed in Kraganmore during and after the events of Oblivion, serving in the local shrine of Akatosh, most likely as an undercover agent again. Kraganmore being of course the major city in the very southwestern portion of Morrowind's mainland, at the border with Cyrodiil. Eventually, Caius returned to the Imperial City to visit the tomb of Uriel VII, leaving his blade and a number of apple slices as a sign of respect. Caius then stated that he was going to look into visiting the symposium that the Imperial Geographical Society were setting up, with him thinking about joining them. And this seems to be the last we heard about the old Caius. In my opinion, one of the best written video game characters who well deserved a #1 spot on my top 10 list of favorite Morrowind NPCs. And that was all for today. I hope you guys enjoyed another top list video. Again, it was surprisingly hard to compile a top 10 list, simply because in Morrowind there are so many NPCs that stand out and deserve a spotlight. And because of that, I may or may not make another list of favorite characters, sort of a follow-up. These videos require a lot of time to write, record and edit, so if there is enough interest, I may do it at some point. In any case, thank you all for watching, and if you like this type of content, please subscribe, like and comment, because it motivates me to produce more. And I hope you all have a great day, and I see you soon.